They said once radars overlapped, once tracking gates were layered, once launch crews were chained to automated warnings, no aircraft flying in daylight could cross the belt and survive. But beneath those sweeping electronic search cones, skimming barely 50 feet above cold seas, a single RAF Blackburn Buccaneer was already inbound. No stealth coatings, no electronic warfare tricks, just discipline and altitude too low to exist on radar theory charts. Because this was not about speed. This was about being lower than the missiles were built to see. So when one gray strike jet challenged an entire simulated SAM defense web, would the missiles finally catch their prey? Or would the web collapse before it could even close? Welcome to Hidden Valor. The briefing room was dim and windowless. Built that way so pilots forgot about the comfort of daylight before flying into places where daylight could not reach. At the front wall, a NATO tactical chart glowed with red arcs layered across a coastal map. Radar search zones, SAM firing baskets, early warning coverage funnels. It looked airtight. The intelligence officer tapped the overlay with a pen. "This is a simulated enemy belt," he said. Triple-layer acquisition radars feeding into launch batteries. The Americans and Europeans around the table murmured approval. Coverage like that was supposed to be unbeatable, especially at daylight when optical acquisitions supplemented radar sweeps and atmospheric clutter was minimal. At the back of the room, a squadron of RAF Buccaneer crews studied the board in absolute silence. They knew something the display did not show. Altitude. The map assumed all aircraft would show themselves above the radar horizon. The ability to stay below it was not in doctrinal equations. The RAF strike lead finally spoke. "We will not go over this belt," he said quietly. "We will go under it." The room stilled. Naval radars depended on what physicists called the curvature problem, meaning radar beams do not bend with the Earth. Every radar had a blind margin just above sea level. Normally, that blind zone was considered irrelevant. No aircraft could practically remain inside it for any distance. The Buccaneer existed to destroy that assumption. On the flight line at Lossiemouth, a single gray Buccaneer was prepared for a solo penetration mission. Externally, it looked no different from routine training loads. Simulated iron bomb racks, dummy anti-ship missile shapes. Internally, it was pure discipline. Terrain following autopilot calibrated. Radar silent. Emissions fully suppressed. The plan was cold. Low altitude run at 60 feet. Speed stable at 430 knots. No climb until weapon release point. Not for evasion, but to test something NATO planners were not fully comfortable admitting. Could a modern SAM web respond fast enough to something that never appeared until it was already lethal? The Buccaneer launched under pale daylight, not waiting for darkness to conceal mistakes. Cloud bands drifted offshore, but little heavy cover was expected. This would not be a hiding flight. This would be a truth flight. The pilot leveled out at wave-top height, almost beyond sight limitations. Sea spray already streaking the windscreen. The navigator stabilized inertial track and began a countdown. 30 minutes to belt entry. No search radar emissions, no chatter. The jet became a moving absence. Across the simulated defense network, NATO SAM crews manned console huts, operators scanning clean scopes. American instructors watched alongside them. This exercise was not built to flatter the attackers. It was designed to be a stress test. The belt would use long-range radar acquisition, low-angle height finding radars, integrated fire control tracks. On paper, this should be overwhelming. Only one thing stood untested at this scale. Extreme sea-level flight, sustained over long distances. The Buccaneer crossed the first detection arc at exactly 60 feet. Nothing changed. No blips, no alarms. At 15 miles inside the belt, operators adjusted gains. Sea clutter noise was intense that day. Still nothing. Inside the cockpit, the navigator spoke once. Entered Zone 1. The pilot simply nodded. Hands steady, no sweat. Bird sometimes flew higher than he was now. At 30 miles penetration, the first simulated enemy radar began momentary contact flicker. Burst too weak to form locking tracks. To the operators, it looked like static, filtered out automatically. No alarm sounded. The Buccaneer continued unchallenged, already deeper into the missile belt than any exercise chart predicted possible. But despite invisibility, the pilots knew the most dangerous phase was still ahead. The missile batteries did not need perfect track to fire. They needed only one moment of correlation, and timing would decide the outcome. The first warning did not come from the ground. It came from the Buccaneer's passive receiver. A soft spike blipped across the cockpit display. Faint and momentary search radar sweep, the navigator reported. But there was no tone, no hard tracking indication, which meant exactly what the RAF planners had predicted. They were being brushed by radar, not targeted by it. On the ground, a NATO radar operator frowned at a scope. Across the clutter band near sea level, the system registered a faint, inconsistent smear, not moving the way returns normally do. Not stationary either. He adjusted gain. Nothing. The return vanished. Probably clutter anomaly. He muttered and logged no alert. The Buccaneer pressed forward at 60 feet, now 30 miles deeper into hostile territory. Altitude remained unchanged. The sea churned violently beneath the wings. The aircraft's autopilot compensated constantly. Tiny wing adjustments made dozens of times per second to keep the jet from kissing the surface. The missile batteries were now within theoretical reach. If a target appeared even briefly at the right angle, launch baskets could be assigned. But locking required correlation between two radars, acquisition and tracking. That correlation never came. At Battery 2, the fire control radar operator suddenly froze. "I have got something popping in and out at sea level, bearing 072. The range was short, too unstable. Controllers deliberated. Attempt hold. The operator tried tracking manually. Crude veering sweeps directed downward. Nothing solid. Returns died as soon as the antenna dipped below clutter thresholds. Inside the Buccaneer cockpit, the navigator spoke again. Height finder radar queries detected. The pilot did not look up. Maintain. Their performance envelope was already maxed out. Climbing or diving even 5 feet would shatter the radar illusion. This part demanded discipline bordering on nerve. At radar node 3, a different operator caught something flickering across clutter. Possible low flyer. This time it was escalated. The coordinating SAM controller glanced at his screen. Correlation times were too short. The computer could not designate it as hostile fast enough. But protocol allowed crews to go to launch prep mode even without full lock. They did. Missile systems powered up. Launch rails rose. Launcher crews tightened harnesses as the waiting klaxon sounded. 10 seconds were all they needed. Just 10 seconds of sighting stability. In the Buccaneer cockpit, the navigator's breathing slowed. Radiation spike. Fire control energizing. The missile systems were now actively hunting him. For the first time, this was not theory. This was lethal timing. Ditching preloaded climb abort, the pilot murmured. Meaning if they climb even slightly, they die. Radars continue to fail graphical lock, but optical spotters were now fully engaged. Daylight observation posts along the simulated belt scanned manually. Seawater glare and haze complicated everything. Tiny wave crests glittered like reflective aircraft skins. False positives exploded. Then finally, one optical observer saw something. Jet gray flashed beneath sea haze. Contact bearing west-southwest. The shout moved fast. Radar controllers slewed to the visual cue and depressed antenna angle. For slightly longer than a heartbeat, the Buccaneer became a valid electronic track. Inside the cockpit, the warning tone began to chirp. Fire control lock was reaching stability. This was the moment no Buccaneer crew wanted. They were now inside missile range, and detection talk had ended. Now only timing mattered. The cockpit warning tone cut through the Buccaneer's churning vibration like a razor. Not a full lock yet, but too close for comfort. The navigator watched the passive receiver oscillate. They are trying to hold a track. The pilot's jaw tightened. Holding track meant fire was seconds away, but the Buccaneer could not climb, could not turn sharply, could not accelerate visibly. Any dramatic move would kick the aircraft out of the radar shadow and provide the SAM web the target clarity it needed. The only escape now was not maneuver. It was precision invisibility. On the ground, The SAM controller saw a ghost become a shape. The weak contact had aligned across two sensors long enough to generate a valid intercept path. Launch basket resolving. 5 seconds. Fire control radar slewed downward, beams skimming the sea surface like probing fingers. For 3 continuous seconds, the radar echo held. That is it. We have it. Then the echo broke. The Buccaneer crossed a micro edge in the terrain. Not a hill or obstacle, but a subtle dip where wave patterns and atmospheric ducting combined to scatter radar coherence. Just enough. The lock failed. The launch window collapsed. In the cockpit, the warning tone shifted, then vanished. Navigator confirmed lock dropped. The pilot exhaled. They had no seconds to celebrate because escape did not mean safety. Not yet. SAM batteries reattempted acquisition. Sector radars blanketed the search volume. Operators widened angle sweeps, shifted to brute force scanning rather than precision locking. The result was total noise. The computers could not separate aircraft from sea again. Optical search teams scanned furiously, but the Buccaneer had adjusted slightly. A controlled descent from 60 feet to 40 feet, tucking deeper into the mirror of ocean glare. 2 tiny altitude corrections, but ones no radar could follow. Now the navigational timer began flashing. 2 miles to weapons release gate. The simulator assessed firing position just once, enough to neutralize a defended installation on exercise scoring. If they made that gate, the SAM web would legally be declared breached. The Buccaneer stayed steady. No jukes, no climbs. Smoothness was concealment. 5 miles. 4. 3. Below the cockpit windows, a radar installation passed unseen, dome silhouetted against shore haze. None of its operators saw the jet crossing directly beneath its beamline. Weapon gate beacon tone chimed. Simulated launch complete. In exercise scoring, target neutralized. The Buccaneer had done it. It had crossed the layered missile defense zone and struck the heart of it without ever sustaining a valid missile lock. But triumph was meaningless if they did not leave alive. Exfiltration now began. The most dangerous mistake after penetration was relief climb. Many air crews died, historically not on ingress but on the climb out. The pilot kept the jet pinned at 40 feet, accepting enormous physical strain for safety. Behind them, SAM search radars kept groping into emptiness. Launch rails remained cocked, but the prey was gone. When the Buccaneer finally climbed 15 minutes later outside belt range, there was no illumination, no chase, no intercept. The navigator leaned back after hours locked forward. Nothing followed, he confirmed. The pilot nodded. No one ever sees a thing that does not show. The debrief hall smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, the quiet aftermath of a mission that had shaken assumptions more than any loud success ever could. On the projection wall, the NATO exercise replay rolled frame by frame. Dotted lines marked SAM coverage cones. Red engagement bubbles overlapped in intimidating geometry. And cutting straight through the middle of it all, a single thin blue track. The Buccaneer's flight path. It entered the defensive belt low. It remained low. It exited low. No valid engagement solution was shown at any point. AUS missile evaluation officer leaned forward. Our systems never saw enough to shoot. No excuses followed. The data was unforgiving. Radar analysts stepped through timelines showing the briefest of flickers. Unstable echoes drowned out by sea clutter and atmospheric ducting. Height-finding radars miss entirely. Fire control never reached stable illumination time. One figure glowed on the screen. Longest continuous track, 3.2 seconds. Required lock time to launch, 10 seconds. The room went dead quiet. 5-second windows do not kill aircraft, the American officer said finally. That is the problem. Outside in the fading daylight, the Buccaneer stood cooling on the tarmac. Salt spray still streaked along its flanks. Maintenance ladders leaned casually against the fuselage. The strike pilot walked once around the nose before heading to stand down. One ground chief shook his head. Flew under a missile war today, he murmured. Did not even make the noise. The pilot only smiled faintly. That night, doctrine shifted quietly. Not rapidly. Institutions never pivot fast, but surely, Radar search cones were asked to slope lower. Early warning gate tolerances were adjusted. New optical correlation teams were assigned. Because it was now known a missile web was only as strong as the altitude it could see. Years later, younger pilots would hear the Buccaneer story retold in mess halls as part caution, part reverence. Do not beat the SAMs by outrunning them. Beat them by denying them the right to see. The Buccaneer crews never called it a victory. To them, it had simply been the job, executing physics exactly as trained. But within NATO defense circles, the run would be remembered as a day they learned something cold and permanent. The most dangerous aircraft is not the fastest. It is the one that stays where weapons cannot reach. And somewhere far out over salt water and sun glare, in the empty layer where radar falters, that single gray jet still flew, not as a myth, but as hidden valor,